Happy to be here this afternoon with everybody. Happy to be finishing up the series on James that we've been doing. So if you're just joining us, we've been spending the last 5 weeks now on the book of James. And it breaks out real easy because it's a 5-chapter book, so we've been taking a chapter a week. And you've had a chance to hear from several members of our teaching team. We've had Leanne share a message, Lisa shared a message, Scott shared a message. Amy was going to, but then we traded, so I didn't have to sing. So I spoke last week, and I get to finish up the series again today. It's been a really fun time going through this, and I gave everyone in their teaching like full realm. I said you can either go through the entire chapter and try to pull out several points, or you can pick just one part of the chapter and really focus in on that. And we've had some of both of that as we've gone through. And we've seen that James is a very practical, very straightforward book. James was the half-brother of Jesus, and he was one of the leaders in the Jerusalem church. And he sent a letter out to believers that had been scattered outside of Jerusalem to encourage them and to give them instructions for how to live the life God wanted them to live. And it's always been one of my favorite books because it's so practical and so straightforward, and there's so much you can pull out of there for application. And today we're going to take a look at chapter 5. Chapter 5 has 20 verses. It's got some of my favorite verses in the entire in the entire book in this chapter. And I'm not going to spend time on any of my favorite verses, actually. I'm going to spend time on the first 6 verses, and that's because as I've gone through this so many different times before, I find that when I get to chapter 5, these first 6 verses I kind of like read through and don't give much thought to as I'm trying to get to the good stuff, right? And if we're all honest, there's parts of the Bible like that for all of us. Let me plow through this section here so I can get to the good stuff that's after it, right? But as I started working on this message several weeks ago, it really hit me that I needed to spend a lot of time focusing on these first 6 verses. And as time went about, I found more and more that the entire message was really centered around these first 6 verses. So Beth read them for us before. I want to read them for you again, though, and then we're going to dive a little bit into what's going on here. If you got your Bible and you want to turn to James chapter 5, that'd be great, because we're going to reference some things from right here in the text. James chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourself on the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered innocent ones who were not opposing you. These first 6 verses are not at all instructional. He gives the rich no commands to follow or principles to try to implement or put into place. These first 6 verses read like they're right out of one of the Old Testament prophets. It's a condemnation spoken on the rich for things they have done, and a warning of impending judgment that's going to come upon them for the decisions and things that they have already done. So why are they being condemned? Why is he so harsh with the rich here? If we look back in the text, we see 4 things he points out, four flaws that he's pointing out to them. The first is he accuses them of hoarding wealth. He says, you have hoarded wealth. The second was he said they failed to pay the workers that were working their fields. So people were coming out, they were dependent on that income, and they were doing the work, and they were not actually getting paid for what they were doing. He says they've lived in luxury and self-indulgence. That's the third thing, luxury and self-indulgence. And the fourth thing is he says that they've condemned and murdered innocent people. And now I think that James is not speaking literally of murder. I don't think he's saying that these rich people went out and just started killing poor people for fun. I think what he's pointing out is that by not paying these poor workers, they didn't have money to provide for their family, so you put their family and their own lives at risk and complicit in what happens to them as a result of it. So part of the reason that I skip through these verses and I read them and then I move on to the good stuff is because I look at this and I say, this doesn't apply to me, right? I'm not a rich landowner, and I don't withhold wages from workers, right? I don't have anyone that works for me. So, in fact, I'm not rich at all. Like, I'm comfortable middle class, maybe. So, interesting, when you take a look at statistics for the United States, they say that the poverty line of the United States currently is defined as anyone that makes anyone that makes less than $24.55 a day. If you make less than $24.55 per day, you're considered to be in poverty level within the United States. The World Bank has statistics out there for the entire world. When you take all the world and combine it together and then cross-section it, in 2017 they said the international poverty line was $2.15 a day. $2.15 a day to live off of. So when I look at it that way, I'm actually quite wealthy compared to many people in the world. But when I look at myself from this perspective and I see, oh, maybe I'm more wealthy than I think. I'm not Elon Musk or Bill Gates, but I'm making a lot more money than a lot of people around the world. But when I start to see that, then that's a very troubling observation. Because then it brings about some very uncomfortable questions that I have to ask myself as a result of this passage. Am I hoarding wealth? Am I living in luxury and self-indulgence? Are others suffering because of my lack of generosity? Does James' condemnation apply to me after all? James gives no instruction, just condemnation here. But there are plenty of other places in the Bible, fortunately, that do give us instruction on what to do with our money. And so what I want to do today is I want to take a look at two passages of Scripture, and each passage has one important concept about money. And I think these two passages and these two concepts that we're going to pull away help us to see a proper perspective for how to handle our money so we don't end up in a place where we are falling under this condemnation that James gives. The first one, we're going to go to everyone's favorite book of the Bible. We're going to go to the book of Leviticus, right? Everyone's favorite book of the Bible, right? So you can blow the dust off it if you want to. We're going to look at Leviticus 19. And this is coming at a time Leviticus, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. This covers from the beginning of creation to the time where God takes the Israelites out of Egypt and they are getting prepared to go into the promised land. And so you find during this time where they have come out of Egypt and they're in the promised land, they're going through this 40-year period where God is trying to get Egypt out of them, right? Because literally outside of Moses and his wife, every single Israelite did not know what it was like to be a free person. They had lived their entire life in slavery. Their parents had lived their entire lives in slavery. Their grandparents had lived their entire lives in slavery. All they knew was how to be a slave. So now they were to be a free people. Now they could do things differently. God wanted to make sure that as a free people, they didn't function the same way the Egyptians did. He wanted them to function differently. He wanted them to see, what does life look like when you live it the way I intend you to live life out? And so that's where we get a lot of the teachings we see in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. God is teaching the people his ideal way for them to live. And in Leviticus 19, verses 9 through 10, he says this: "When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap the very edges of your field or gather the gleaning of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyards a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and foreigner. I am the Lord your God." So the first principle we see here is this: God expects his people to set aside some of what they have for the poor. God expects his people to set aside some of what they have for the poor. And you can see where this would be a big deal, right? Because now all of a sudden, like, I have my own land. I was a slave. I didn't have my own possessions. Anything I had could be taken from me. But now I have my own land. And I can grow my own food on my own land that I planted myself. And then God says, that's great, but not all of it's yours. What do you mean? It's on my land. I planted it. It's my crops. He says, no, you get to keep most of it for yourself, but you save some of it for the poor around you. Because he realizes, in that Deuteronomy passage that we read at the beginning of the service today, he talked about how there will always be poor among you. There's always going to be some among you, for whatever reason. It might be because of some of their own bad choices, or it can be because of unfortunate circumstances. There's going to be some people around you that don't own land, so they can't grow crops, and they can't make money, so they're dependent on the generosity of others to get their daily provision. And so God expects his people to set aside some of what they have to help the poor. When you get that paycheck, when you get that money, it's not all for you. Some of that is intended to be used to help other people. So he's teaching them that what you have is not all yours. The second passage I want to look at comes from Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 24. This is Jesus teaching. It's like right smack in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. Probably a very familiar passage that you've heard many times before. Jesus says this: "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, the whole body will be full of light. Or some translations say if your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either they will hate the one and love the other, or they will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. So this is all. I always found this an interesting passage because he gets on talking about earthly treasures and heavenly treasures, and then we have all this discussion about good eyes and bad eyes, and then we get back to God and money again. So the interlude with the good eye and the bad eye, this has actually baffled scholars for a period of time. But in more recent scholarship, as people spent more time studying the first century culture and what went on during the time, they began to shed light on what he was saying here. You see, in first century Judaism, to tell someone they had a good eye meant that they were generous. So if someone had a good eye, they were generous. And if someone had a bad eye, it meant they were stingy. So if we reread the passage in light of that now, you see the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, or if you are generous, your whole body is full of light. Right? But if your eye is bad, or if you are stingy, your whole body is full of darkness. So this principle that he's bringing out is very simple. The second principle is this. God expects his people to be generous with their money. God expects his people to be generous with their money. So how do we get to a place where we get away from the that's mine mentality, that's my stuff, my things, my money, and get to the idea where we are more generous with what we have? How do we get to that? You see, a lot of times in teaching, whether we're talking about sermons or Bible studies or any kind of teaching, one of the best ways to take biblical principles and put them into practice is to give real life examples of living those things out. So as a teacher, for myself, either giving you examples from my own life about how I live out a scriptural principle, or giving you an example that I've seen somewhere else in the world, someone else's life, where we've learned this principle, and now we're seeing how someone practically lived it out in 21st century America, so it's more relatable to us. The funny thing is, we don't do that when we teach on money in the church mostly. And the reason is this, because I can't share with you what I do with my money because that's rude, right? We consider that to be rude to talk about what we do with our money and our finances. So I can't give you a lot of good examples from my life because it would be rude for me to talk about how I spend my money. I can't give you examples from other people's lives because I don't know what they do with their money because it would be rude for them to tell me, right? So it's really hard to give specific examples when you're talking about money. Most of the sermons I've heard on money, and I've heard plenty of sermons on money growing up in the church, I found to be very uninspiring because they're heavy on principle and very light on how to actually live out those principles. So I want to ask a favor today. I want to ask you to allow me to be rude with you this afternoon and share a little bit about my journey and what God has taught me about money and how I've gone through it, in the hopes that by me being a little rude today, it will help inspire you in your own lives and make it easier to figure out how to live out these principles. So my story with money centers around four basic things. There's kind of four key points in my life that really are anchors that help me see what to do with money. They center around four things. One single mom, two amazing boys, three best friends, and eBay. All right? So we're going to start with eBay first because that's probably the most intriguing out of the four, right? Oh, I remember when eBay first started. You know, eBay's kind of like another version of Amazon almost nowadays, but when eBay first started, it was something completely unique. It was an online auction house. You could take a picture of anything you owned, upload it on eBay, and put a starting bid price on there, and people all across the world could see what you listed and start bidding on it until it was sold. And you could list it for 1 day, 3 day, or 5 days, and you put up that minimum price, and then you start getting emails as people are bidding higher and higher. And so when this first came out, there were a bunch of us that looked at this and went, wow. You start looking around your house and you're like, I'm sitting on a gold mine. All this stuff I have that I don't use, people are going to pay some serious money for this stuff. So I decided to start with CDs, right? With CDs. No, a CD is a round disc that plays music, okay? So But yes, so before you could download it all, we had these discs called CDs. So I had this box full of CDs back when you still could get a CD player in your car, and I thought there's all these ones I don't listen to anymore, and I'm going to list them, and I'm going to make some serious money. I got hundreds of dollars in this box, right? Because this was at the time where like you wouldn't get them on, like you go to the record store to buy CDs, and it would cost you like 14 to 16 bucks. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to sell them for 10 bucks a piece. $10 times a whole lot of CDs is going to be a whole lot of money for me. So I listed my first CD for $10, and I put it up for 5 days, and I was very sad to see that nobody bid on my CD. Apparently it wasn't that big a deal. And so after a couple tries of this, I realized I must be doing something wrong. So I started to look, well, what do other people list CDs for? And I found that if you want to get people to bid on them, you start at $1. Because if you put it up for $10, people are like, I'm not paying that. But if you put it up for $1, there's usually someone that's like, I'd pay $1 for that. So I put it up for $1, and the next thing you know, someone else is like, I'd pay $2 for that. I'd pay $3. And so I got really excited as I start to see the bids go up, and then I realized that I'm starting to sell CDs. I'm starting to mail them out and send them off, and I realized that I'm getting $3 to $4 per CD. Right? And that's what I'm getting at first. But then I got to pay shipping, right? And then I got to pay the PayPal fee, because PayPal is the platform you use to get payment. And then I got to pay the listing fee to eBay. So I'm not really getting $3 to $4 for my CD. I'm getting a lot less than that. And I realized that, you know what? eBay, maybe it's not all as cracked up to be. Now, like, some people have cracked the code and made serious money selling stuff on eBay, but not me. Not me. So I stopped selling things on eBay, and I stopped for 2 reasons. One of the reasons I no longer sell things on eBay is because several years ago I got a letter from the federal government telling me that they are monitoring my eBay account moving forward. That's another story for another day, but that is one reason why I do not sell things on eBay anymore. The other reason is because I have chosen, if I have something in my life that I no longer use, I do not sell it, I donate it, or give it away to someone else. I decided that if I've got something that at some point in time had value to me and no longer does, but it has value to someone else, I would rather give it to them for free than ask them for money. And I do this to try to live out that first principle of setting aside some of what I have for people that are less fortunate. Right? Because, I mean, I've got a nice house in Hampstead. I've got a nice fenced backyard that at any point in time has lots of dog poop in it, right? But I don't grow crops, right? I don't have a wheat field or a corn field in my backyard, so I can't leave the edges of my field available for people to come take as they need. Right? I have an herb garden. So if any of you are hard up for cash and you need some herbs for cooking, you're welcome to come to my house and take any of the herbs from around the edge of the herb garden for yourself, right? Yes, plenty of mint. But outside of that, like, how do I practically live that concept out? I do it by taking what I have in excess and giving it away rather than selling it. Which brings me to the second part of my story, 3 best friends. 3 best friends, and how does that affect me? You see, in my early 20s, I had 2 other best friends, and the 3 of us decided we were going to get together and we were going to hold each other accountable. Each of us was in positions and areas where in most of our Christian circles we were kind of in leadership roles, and we thought, well, as leaders we need to have someone holding us accountable as well. And so we got together and we started to look at what are the things we're doing that we shouldn't be doing, and what are the things we should be doing that we're not doing. And we were real simple. We made lists. So I had a list of all the things I'm not supposed to be doing or that I am supposed to be doing. And I had one for Chris and I had one for Ken. And I would hold on to the list, and every week we'd get together and we'd exchange lists, and we'd grill each other. How are you doing in this area? How are you doing in that area? And you had to be honest and tell how you were doing. One particular week, one of the guys said, you know, I feel really convicted I haven't been tithing lately, and I need to start doing that again. And then my other friend was like, you know what? I haven't been tithing lately either. I need to start doing that again. And I thought to myself, I've never tithed in my life. I'm in my early 20s, right? I've been going to church my whole life, and I don't know that I'd ever given a penny of my own money to a church before. Like, I'd sit there next to my parents in church, and they would give me a couple dollars to throw in the collection plate when it went by. But I don't know that I ever pulled any money out of my own pocket and put it in a collection plate at church. And I felt convicted, and I said, you know what? I'm going to start tithing too. Now, if you're not familiar with what tithe is, most of us is kind of a churchy word. If you don't know what that is, it's the idea that giving 10% of what you have away. Right, so this was an Old Testament concept, because in the Old Testament time, there were the 12 tribes of Israel that were that God had, and 11 of the tribes were supposed to work normal jobs and make money. And the 12th tribe, the tribe of Levi, was not supposed to work a normal job. They weren't supposed to work in the fields. They weren't supposed to become carpenters or tradesmen. They were supposed to do the work of God. They would minister in the tabernacle, later on in the temple. They were God's workers, and they were supposed to live on the tithes of everyone else. So those that could make a living for themselves were supposed to take 10% of what they made and then donate it so that the Levites could have money to live off of, and so that the tabernacle had money for upkeep and the temple had money for upkeep as well. That was God's design, and is my belief that now continues on throughout the ages, this concept of tithing, taking some of what we have and giving it back to be used for God's purposes. And so I made a commitment that day. I am going to start tithing. I'm going to take 10% out of my paycheck every week moving forward and start giving it to church. And I got asked every single week about that. Are you tithing? Are you tithing? And consistently I could say, yes, I am. Yes, I am. And I brought that mentality into our marriage, and I told Amy, like, this is basically a non-negotiable. Like, this is what we do because this is what God wants us to do. And she was fully on board because she's a wonderful, godly woman. And so we, in our marriage too, we just tithe every single, I guess normally once a month I'd write a check, but tithing regularly to the church, 10% of what we brought in. And then we got to this point in our life where we were between churches. You know, we had left one and we hadn't quite found the next one yet, and we went through a period, it was actually several months of trying to find where we felt like God wanted us to be. And during that time, this money that we would normally give to church just started building up and accumulating. We had a whole separate bank account for it that it would go in. That way I could keep it straight and make sure I wasn't spending it where I shouldn't. And that bank account just kept building and building because I had no church to give it to. Which brings me to the third key thing in my story on money. One single mom. See, we had a close friend that was a single mom that was going through a tough time, and she had a particularly bad month, and she was confiding in Amy a couple of days before the end of the month, I don't have my rent money this month, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And she wasn't asking for money, she was just asking for prayer because she didn't know what to do. And so Amy and I talked, and we said, we have this like pile of money in this account here that we can't touch. It's money that we have set aside for church. It's money we have set aside for doing God's will. We can't spend it on ourselves. Why don't we pay her rent this month? And so we went to her and we said, we gave her a check. We said, here is the money for your rent this month. We want to help you out. And she absolutely refused to take it. And then we explained to her, no, you don't understand. This is money that is set aside that we cannot touch for our own personal benefit. This is money that is set aside for God. This is our tithe. We want to use some of it for you right now because we don't have a church to give it to, and we feel like it could be better used here. And so she took it, and she was able to pay her rent. Now, I know some of you in here are probably already thinking, Dan, did you not listen to Beth do the gospel reading today? Where it says that when you do your good deeds, do them in secret. Don't do it so that other people will know what you're doing. Now you just told me one of your good deeds. So I fully realize that by sharing that story with you today, I have forfeited my eternal reward for that good deed that I did. And I have willingly forfeit my eternal reward in the hopes of helping you understand better my story and why I am where I am today. But you only get one. That's the only one you get today. I'm not giving up any more rewards today. Okay? But after this, Amy and I really felt impassioned, this is great having some money set aside to help someone if they have a need. And so we decided that we would never have a time period after that where we didn't have some money we were setting aside for helping other people. So we eventually found another church, and I remember talking to the pastor of the church and explaining to him kind of what's going on and how we kind of handle our tithe. And I said, we've come to the conclusion that we are going to give 5% to the church, and we were going to set 5% aside for helping other people. And he was like, okay, that's fine. And then what I did over time was, as I started to get raises at work and things, whatever I got as a raise, say it's $100 a month raise, 10% of that raise would all go toward the church. And so over time, as I got more and more raises at work, it became 6% church, 4% other people, 7% church, 3%. And we eventually came to the point where now we do it, 10% of everything I make as a primary income earner in the household goes toward church. 10% of what Amy makes as a secondary income earner in the household goes toward helping other people. And we've been doing that for years now, and it's given us the ability to be able to financially support the churches where we go and also have money to financially support and help people when they have a need. And it's been amazing to see what God does and all the different ways that we've been able to use our money to help other people. Sometimes that bank account, the money's going out as fast as it's coming in as we're trying to help people. Other times it builds up pretty big. There's not a lot of stuff going on. And then someone has a big financial need and we can write a big check. And that can be a lot of fun too. Just to be able to see God work through money that we know is not our own, that we've set aside for him. I have all kinds of great stories and I won't share any one of them with you because I'm keeping those rewards for later. But I can tell you that it's borderline addictive when you see the difference you can make in someone's life when they have a need and you can meet it right there and then for them. And know that you have that set aside already and that money can't be used for your own benefit. And so I would never want to go back to a time where we don't have money like that set aside for people. And that brings me to my fourth concept, the fourth major key factor for me, and that is 2 amazing boys. You see, Amy and I have learned this lesson. We want to make sure that our boys grow up to be men that know this lesson as well. I didn't learn about tithing until I was in my early 20s. I wanted my boys to learn it much sooner. So I remember when the boys were younger, it got to the point where it wasn't even fun to go to Walmart with them anymore, right? Because you go to Walmart for those 1 or 2 things, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, can you buy me this? Can you buy me this? Can you buy me this? And so I sat down with Amy one day and I said, we're going to give them an allowance, right? Because that way they have their own money they can spend and they can determine what they're going to spend it on, and I don't keep getting asked to spend money on them. And basically we decided to do $5 a week, and all they need to do to get their $5 a week is exist in my household. It's not tied to chores, it's not tied to things. We just said, you just live here, you get $5 a week now. And then as I gave them their $5, I told them, out of your $5, 50 cents goes into savings every week. 50 cents goes into helping other people every week. $4 you can use for whatever you want. 10% savings, 10% tithing, live off of 80%. Great financial principle in general, and I wanted my kids to learn it back when the money amount was small and the mistakes would be minimal in their own lives. So we've been doing that, and it's been amazing to see the different ways that they have taken their helping other people money and used it, sometimes giving to church, sometimes giving to a neighbor or a friend, but they have been able to use their money in lots of different ways to help other people as well. And it's been neat to see them enjoy that and see the joy that comes when you're able to give to someone else. And my hope is that this continues to really stick with them. I know there was a while back when Noah was pretty little and we were talking and he said, what would be cool is if I could get like $100 a week, right? Like $100 a week, that would be so cool. I didn't tell him, buddy, you'd be below the poverty line in America. But $100 a week. And I said, well, you have to realize something too, buddy. If you got $100 a week, you actually only get to keep about 65 of that, right? Because the government's going to take 25 of those dollars for themselves. And then you got to set aside 10% for helping other people too. And he just looked at me and he goes, well, of course I have to set aside money for helping other people. I'm like, good. It's sticking. He's getting it. What I'm trying to teach is getting instilled in him. And then I remember Nathan had an assignment in one of his classes where the teacher asked them to draw some kind of like a diagram picture of what would you do with $1,000 if someone just handed you $1,000 tomorrow. And so Nathan brought his assignment home and was showing it to me, and there was different things he would do. And then one thing he had in there was 10% for helping other people. And I'm like, good. They're embracing this concept now. So when they get to adulthood, they've already embraced it. They've already lived it out. And then they can do it when the stakes are higher and when they can have an even greater impact in people's lives. So my kids have been learning these 2 principles from a very young age. God expects his people to set aside some of what they have for the poor. And God expects his people to be generous with their money. Now, what about you? How can you go about living out these 2 very important principles in your own life? Well, one way is simple, taking things like things you don't need anymore and donating them or giving them away rather than selling them. That is one thing you can do, and that's one thing that I've found a lot of benefit in my own life from. Another thing you can do, set aside some money each month for church. Some money each month for church. If you've never tithed before, it can be very intimidating to be like, I have to take 10% out of everything and just start giving it away. I don't know if I can afford that. So if you look at it, you're like, okay, 10% is a non-starter. We're just going to forget this whole concept. I'd rather you start smaller than not start at all. So pick something. Pick some amount, whether it's, and you can do either a fixed dollar value, I'm going to give X amount of dollars a month to church, or a fixed percentage of your income. I'm going to give 1%, a 0.5%, some percentage of what I make to church. Pick a fixed amount and do it regularly to build in the discipline of not everything I have is for me. Some of it is to be given back to God's service. And then I challenge you too to also set aside a specific amount of money for helping other people as well. This can be a fixed dollar value as well, or it can be a percentage, just like what we were talking about with giving to the church. And for this, I really highly recommend having a separate bank account for. There are lots of banks out there that have free checking accounts. I've got our tithe money in a free checking account. I don't get any interest, but this money is not about making interest. This money is about using it to help other people. And by having a separate bank account, it's really easy to keep track of because it doesn't always go out every week. It's not like it's a monthly thing I do. So if it builds up, I know not to touch that money. That's not mine. That's God's bank account. It just has my name on it. Right? So by doing those things, it starts to build on this principle that not everything I have is mine. Some of what I have is here for other people. And you know that you've got money that you're not going to use for yourself. I think by doing these things, it can help us to get that kind of mindset going. The mindset that not everything I have is my own. And some of what God has given me, He's specifically given me so that others can be blessed through me and through what I do. And I can start you off really simple too, right? So, and this is what I call a $10 challenge. Years ago, I did a $5 challenge, but since COVID, everything costs a lot more money now. Can't buy much at $5. So I'm going to give you a $10 challenge, right? I'm going to ask you to take this week and take $10 and give it away somehow to help somebody else. I don't care how you do it as long as you don't buy them drugs. But take $10 and use it to benefit somebody else. Right? So you can go out and get like a gift card to McDonald's or Subway or Chick-fil-A and give it to somebody randomly. You can pay for the person in the drive-thru behind you. You can pay for someone else's meal at a restaurant. That might cost you more than $10. You can buy $10 worth of cards and send encouraging notes to people. Do you know that it costs about $10 to ship a blessing bear? You can donate $10 to ship a bear to someone that you know needs a hug or love in their life. There are lots of different things you can do, but be thinking creatively, what can I do with something as small as $10? And when you see that you can take something as small as $10 and make a difference, then it motivates us to use even more of our money for that same kind of thing. So that is my hope. My hope is that once you get to see what it is like to be generous, that you'll never not want to be generous again. That you'll want to continue to live a life for God where you realize not everything I take in is mine. Some of what I've been given is given to me so that I can bless others with it as well. Let's close in prayer. God, I thank you that you are a generous God. I thank you that you love us, God. And God, I thank you that you give us a chance to participate along with you in that generosity. God, you have given us the greatest gift we could ever give anyone. You have given us a chance for eternal life with you, for salvation through the death and resurrection of your Son. It's a tremendous gift that cost a tremendous price. And you expect us, God, to also give of ourselves to others as well. God, there will always be others less fortunate around us. God, I know for years I overlooked helping the poor because I didn't know if that person was poor because they were making bad decisions or if they were poor because of some unfortunate circumstance. But God, one of the things you've taught me over the course of my life is that is not my concern. That when there is a need out there that needs to be met and you prompt me to meet that need, it is not my job to figure out if it's a valid need or not all the time. That if I spend too much time on that, then it holds me back sometimes from helping someone that really has a need. So God, I pray that you would give all of us that heart, God. Give us a heart to help others. Give us a heart of generosity, a heart that realizes that some of what we are supposed to be doing is helping those less fortunate than ourselves. God, I thank you and I praise you. And I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.